Oh, okay. So in the global environment here, it has a little, I know it's hard to see. There's this little square icon. It's supposed to look like a miniature table. And so this one, if we open it, you can see the stuff in here. And then if I open this one, they look identical up here on the screen, but this one is all characters. This one is numbers. So something to show you here. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of this, but I might as well do it now. So that first object, DF1, which has all the characters, suppose I wanted to look at, let me see, I don't know if it's going to, hold on. So as I say, you should never do these things on the fly. Oops, hold on. That's the good and the bad of RStudio is it tries to help you. So be careful because these little, I don't know if you saw that, these little pop-up windows show up because it's trying to guess what you're trying to type. So just be careful because accidentally you can click the wrong thing. That's a good question. Some of it I think is built in, and then sometimes it's built in, but it's also referring to what's in your global environment, like history and anyway. Okay, so what I was trying to look at was thinking through. All right, so data frame 1, and I haven't had a chance to show you guys this. So all right. Suppose there's a piece of data that I want to get that's on row 3 and maybe column 5. So you've got to know the name of the data frame, whatever that is. And to pull things out, you put information in, I'm sorry, I guess I should try to write it over there. Put things in brackets, and I'm going to write this a little higher so you guys can see it. So you have that, and then inside the brackets, you put basically an indicator. So if I wanted the element on the 3rd row and the 5th column, I put a 3 in and then a 5. So the 3 here tells me which row it's in. The 5 tells me which column it's in. So if I actually want to, so for example, the 3rd row would be March. And I only have 4 columns, so let's look at the 3rd column. So this should come back, and that 3rd thing is the month abbreviation. So this should give me the month abbreviation for March. So this would be how you'd look things up. And suppose I only wanted 1 column. So if I wanted just the column of month abbreviations, I would leave the row empty and then just put a 3 in after the comma. Likewise, if I wanted to pull, let's say, everything for May, that would be the 5th row. Just leave everything open on the column and it would give me that whole row of information. So it tells me that this is the 5th month. I took the square of it, which is 25. The month abbreviation is May, and the month name is May. So, yes, that's actually kind of nice. R has those built in. Yeah, and month has R has some fantastic date and time handling, but it gets complicated. So that's the good news and the bad news. So I'll just mention that. But the nice thing is the months and things like that are built in. Okay. The reason I was showing you this is, so like I said, with data frame 1 here, because it converted everything to characters, if I look at just that first column in data frame 1, everything comes back as character variables. But the other one, where I actually use the data frame command, I can reference things the same way, but this one's going to come back as numbers. So I'm just pointing that out. So sometimes between what you're looking at, it's that global environment window saves me all the time, because half the time, you know, if I was, suppose I took this and wanted to take the mean of those numbers, R is going to come back and give me an error because it can't take the mean of a bunch of characters, right? It could take the mean of this one because these are all numbers. So again, that whole idea of make sure when you get an error, go back and just double check that something's not coded the wrong way, which that happens in SPSS too. A lot of times, especially brings things in from Excel, and for whatever reason, SPSS decides these aren't numbers, they're string or character variables, and then you get ready to run an analysis and you're like, why isn't it bringing in IL6? You know, well, it thinks IL6 is a bunch of letters, so it can't do analysis. Was there a question? Yeah. What? Yes, so it's showing it here in quotes. The other way that you can see what type of variable you have, there's two commands, and I showed one last time. One is the class command, and the other is one called str, which stands for structure. So if I took this and put it in here for class and structure, so if I run these, this tells me it's a character class, and if I look at the structure, it kind of gives me the same information, but this actually tells me this is a character vector, and these are the elements. And this is of character class. So a lot of times, one of the common R errors that you'll get back is class mismatch, and it'll be because of this. Similarly, if I did these commands for the data that was in our other data frame, where things really did come in and didn't change to character variables, now it tells me it's an integer variable, and it gives me that. And the thing you'll notice is that's basically the information that's in my global environment window. So this one just says everything in it is a character. This says I've got 12 observations of 4 variables, and if I pull this little, it'll actually tell me what each column it thinks it is. So it says the first column's integer, second column's numbers, these two are factors. We'll talk more about factors later. And then this funky list that I made, you know, first element was one number of 30. This is a vector of 12. And that third thing was the whole data frame. And then under the data frame, it goes on and tells you more pieces. All right, so let me save that. And I'll update the code that's out there in Dropbox as well. So has anybody been able to get back on the network? Is it working yet? So the network's down for those of you that just walked in. Anyway, but hopefully this is working. Okay, so we created, let me back up. So we created these 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got five objects now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, actually 6 objects has also created this list. And you'll notice that like this first data frame, and actually this other one, so this cbind and then the data frame, these actually also have the information already about y and y squared. So in a way, these two objects that I created are now redundant. So, you know, I have them basically stored in two places. I have them stored by themselves, and I have them stored inside this data frame. And we'll create a couple more. This is like the little example I did last time. Do a sequence of numbers. For z, we take the sign of them. And I could actually now put these together in a little, and I tell you what, we're going to just go ahead and we'll make this a data frame instead of the cbind. You can do it both ways, but cbind assumes everything is of the same type. So now I've got this stuff in here, and I've got all these things. So I could clean up my environment. I mean, you can see it here in the global environment. If I run the ls command, we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 objects. But some of this stuff is inside other things. So yeah, question? Right. And so yeah, this question came up last time. So I'm being a little bit loose. So in R, when you're calling different functions, I'm going to bring up the help menu here for sequence. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. You'll notice that the first argument is where you're starting from. the second argument is to, and then the third argument is by. So this is called a little bit of lazy coding because I'm not explicitly giving the name of the argument and then the value. I'm just listing them in order and R's figuring it out. But to be perfectly sort of clean, good programming, I would actually go ahead and put in, okay, I want from to be that, I want to be 10, and I want it to go by increments of 0.5. So both of those will work. You know, the sequence command is something that people use a lot, so it most people kind of know the order, but on more complicated functions, it's always a good idea to explicitly list your arguments. So, good question. So no, once I've now captured it, so z and sin z are inside this data frame. And then y and y2, these two are built in, but y and y2 are now captured inside here. I could keep x. So I could do some cleanup. So when I do the list command, and you can already see it in your global environment, but just to show you, I've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got 9 objects, and I don't necessarily need to keep all of those. So I can use this remove command, which is just rm, and say, okay, I no longer need y and y2. I don't need z and sin z. So if I run that, it sort of starts to clean up my environment. And so now if I list it, I've got few less objects. And this isn't that big a deal, but like I said, you know, if you've read in this massive data set and there's only pieces of it you want to keep, after you've done all your sub-selection and stuff, you could go back and remove that big one. So like the CDC data set that I've been playing around with, the full thing, you know, it's over 400,000 records, and I forget, 50 to 100 variables, but the whole thing's like 1.5 gig. It's huge. So once I've done my down selection, I'm going to remove that, so I'm not carrying it around with me. So it's here. Yeah, so it's now, and you sort of have to know where you put things. Right. Yeah. So for the purposes of what I was doing here, I put z and sin z inside the second data frame, and I put y and y2 in my first little data frame. Yeah, and you kind of have to just remember what you did to get there. And I'm going to show you some other stuff here in a little bit where we're going to be sort of creating new variables on the fly, and they'll get created and added, just automatically appended to the data frame we're working in, which is pretty much like what we do in SAS and SPSS, right? Create a new variable and it just gets added to the data set. This gets a little bit into text parsing and stuff. So like suppose I had y1, y2, y3, y4, y5, that kind of thing. There's ways to write it so that you're scripting like a range. But don't ask me to do that on the fly because I don't remember off the top of my head. There's another command here I wanted to show you in addition to sort of the basic list command is ls.str. So str is that structure command that I showed you because it'll give you information about the type and then the structure. So if I do ls.str, then in addition to just giving me the list of objects, it's going to essentially give me data or information just like the global environment window, where, let me scroll this up so you can see. So the ls.str here, it now tells me I have a data frame 1, it's all character variables, there's 12 rows, 4 columns, it's kind of like give me just a little snippet of what the data looks like. Then I've got data frame 1A, that's a data frame, 12 observations, 4 variables. Here are these 4 variables, and I'll explain the $ in just a minute. And then I've got a second data frame that has 21 observations and 2 variables, z and sin z. And then I have this wonky list that I created that has a bunch of different elements in it. I think I might have mentioned it really briefly before, but yeah, so for example, anything after the pound sign goes in as a comment. So, whoops, okay, is the basic list command only lists the objects. ls.str also provides the structure of each object. Whoops. When listed to the console. So to answer Andy's question, if you're really completely at a loss, I mean, you could run the ls.str and just kind of it's like, oh wait, where did I put that variable? Which data frame did it go to? In addition to being able to look through your global environment. All right, so within that context, so you'll notice there's a few things a little bit different. I mean, up there in the global environment, you don't see those little dollar signs, but here you see the dollar signs. So the dollar sign in R is what's called a selector. And for most of what you're going to be doing, it's the dollar sign. There's actually another one that I'm still learning that is sort of what they call S4 objects. Most of this stuff is what they call S3 objects. There's different kinds of objects, hierarchies and stuff. But that dollar sign selector is really handy. So remember how I did where, let's say, we had that. And I'll just work with data frame 2 here. So data frame 2 has 2 columns. If I wanted to get that first column, in brackets, I would just have an empty space, comma 1, which basically says, give me all the rows, first column. The other way to do this, though, would be to say, okay, I'm going to look at that data frame. Give me the column called what? Z. So that dollar sign then allows me to select by the column's name. So let's do that real quick. And I'll come back to the save image here in a second. So that second data frame I could select, and Irene had a good point, so let's select the first column of data frame 2. So this is one way to do it. Use the column number. So you can also add comments after code or before code. And then the other way to do this would be to do data frame, use the dollar sign. And notice what RStudio did. This is so helpful because, you know, if you're working with any public health data set, they still sort of default back to that 8-character summary. So like in a CDC data set that I've been playing around with, there was a thing in there where they calculated or imputed like income or something, and the variable is like TOTD, and I'm like, I'll never remember that. So when you do this, because that data frame is in my global environment, RStudio is trying to be really helpful, and it says, oh, okay, you've identified this data frame. As soon as I type that dollar sign, it gives me a list of all of the columns. And so, you know, if I can't remember the exact name, I can actually select it from here. That's really handy. That right there sold me on RStudio. Yeah. No, well, so when we put in, so good question, because there's a couple of ways to sort of name things. I haven't really talked a lot about naming, and I may hold that to the last workshop. But as soon as I put in that object Z, and then I put in object sign Z, R defaults to naming it whatever the object was that you put into the data frame. So if you had one called like age, another one called BMI, something else called gender, and you put all those in there, it's just going to call them by whatever that variable name was. Now, I can go in and change the names if I want, but for right now, we'll just use the defaults. Yeah, so when we originally delete it, yeah, because at that point, they're 2 separate entities. Good question. All right, so in this case, if I go in and select by the column number, this is one way to do it, and then you can also select by the column name. Whoops. Yes. Sort of. All right, suppose you want to select third row for month, name, and that little data frame that I created. So if I put in data frame 1A and tell it I want month.name. If I stop here, it's going to give me that whole vector. You can actually select an element of a vector. And so this gets a little confusing because the dollar sign here is another way to sort of select a column. So as soon as I do that, it's like the rest of this is now ours ignoring the rest of that. And then if I just put in brackets a 3, then I can select that third one. And so with the data frame, you have 2 pieces, but if you just have a vector, so if I have something like Z, that just goes and gets the third element of that vector. So let's make sure this works before I say it. So this should come back and give me March. And it did. Just ignore that part for right now. But yeah, there was... Right, and this selector becomes incredibly important because most of the time we're going to be doing something where we're looking at an analysis and we're pulling out different variables. And I'll show you guys some more stuff later on because a lot of the functions you don't have to keep typing the data frame, string, variable. You don't have to do that over and over. A lot of times you just go in and put in the variables you're interested in, and then the argument at the end of the function is you tell it which data set you're working with. You actually say data equals. So you could have 10 different data sets here in your environment, and then you just have to remember the variables. So, good question. And a lot of times that's a great, quick way to do analysis. So I talked before about, we go in, we've run a whole bunch of analyses, and then we decide, oh, it'd be really cool to go back and just look at this for just the diabetics. So it's really easy then. I could create a subset called, data set subdiabetes or something, and have that data frame, and then literally just take that and put that in for all of the analyses and just change the data frame I'm using and rerun the whole thing. So sometimes that's really handy. Was there another question? Okay. All right, so lots of different ways to select things back and forth. So I showed these to you before, but now that I've got objects in there, I could come in here and say save image. That's actually going to save everything that was in this global environment, and that's equivalent to being in, where did I find this before? Where was it? Sorry, it is in session save workspace as. So that command save image is the same thing as doing session save workspace as. So that saves all of the objects. So this saves all objects. This command, however, I can actually just save a single object. So save only data frame 2. And so if I run that command, now out here on my hard drive, let me pull up my thing so you guys can see it. So this is the directory that I should be in. And sure enough, now I have workshop2 objects.rdata and df2.rdata. So again, the RData files is just something only R can read, but it reads it really fast. So this is like the equivalent of, I don't know if anybody's ever worked with binary files in SAS. There's a way to do it in SPSS, but I've never done it. Reading and writing out binary files is really a lot more efficient than trying to maintain a lot of structure and overhead. Anyway, I'll just mention that. So especially anybody that's diving into big data, these kind of things do start to matter when you're getting into the gigabyte plus range of data sizes. Yes, so you didn't see this when we were, so I'll do it again, and actually it's here in the notes. So if I go in and clear my workspace, I can either run that command, or in session, I could say, all right, let's clear my workspace. Are you sure? Yes. So everything's gone. So I could load back just that data frame 2, and I could also load the entire compilation of all of the objects. So that's how you get data out and in. That's one way. But again, that's sort of our proprietary. I'm going to show you guys how to do it with Excel and SPSS and stuff here in just a minute.